Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today we're covering a brand new hand trap. Yeah, that's right. For Alliance Insight. Listen, when we came down the stretch for Supreme Darkness, they had really good cards coming down the stretch. They had Clockwork Knight, they had Abalaku, they had the third Mold Charming Nialis, they had Delta of Temptation, and I feel like there was something else. Oh, even Double Wild, the quick play spell. Like, not all those cards are going to be absolute staples forever going forward, but they're all cards that you're like, that's just a good card. That's a good card. That's a good card. Not filler at all. So hopefully Konami keeps that trend going. And here we sit with like 10 slots left in the deck, and we're looking at a new hand trap. So we'll see if Konami's keeping that up right here and now. This card is called the Palms of Kings. The Psalms of Kings. I've seen this word before. I've never known how to pronounce it. I'm not much of a learned man. Anyway, normal trap card. You can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. And if you have no monsters in your graveyard, you can activate this card from your hand. So we are talking hand trap status here. Anyway, there's your artwork. I don't know what this is. The same monster I'm pretty sure we've seen in the other Dominus. This isn't a Dominus card, I guess, by name, but it is a... but this looks like the same monster, this giant head from the other Dominus cards. At least Purge, but I'm actually having trouble thinking of what artwork is actually in Impulse. I own Purge, I don't own Impulse. That's kind of how it is. I've not played a deck yet that can play Impulse since it came out. So anyway, so you can activate this card from your hand if you have no monsters in your graveyard. So that does mean if you draw this with a monster hand trap, you got to make sure you're firing this first. That's something we've seen with some of the other cards. With some of the other hand traps sometimes where just you have to sequence them. Sometimes not in the exact way you want to, but if you want to be able to activate both, that's how you got to do it. Anyway, this card's effect actually reads: when your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, you cannot activate monster effects in the hand, graveyard, and banishment until the end of the next turn after this card activated from the hand resolves. Also, negate that effect. Then, if you have a trap in your graveyard, you can add a Dominus card from your deck to your hand. Whew. Okay. So, restrictions on this card. Obviously, the first restriction up here, where you can only activate this if you have no monsters in your graveyard. At least to activate it from hand. Now, just like the other Dominus cards, they don't even hit you with their restriction if you just set them. So if you do just end up going first and setting this card, you don't have to worry about the restriction at all. You do, however, still have to wait for this restriction. And this restriction is a doozy, right? You cannot activate monster effects in hand, grave, or banishment until the end of the next turn. Even if it was the end of that turn, that would not even be that bad, because going second, you're not that worried about it. That also means for you to activate this from the hand, you can't have a monster hand trap in grave already, and you also can't activate a monster hand trap after this card. So you can pair this with imperms with the other Dominus cards, but you can't really do much else. Man, this is giving me some spicy ideas. I'm not gonna lie, but we'll get to that after. So this card pairs with imperm well. This card pairs with the other Dominus hand traps pretty well. It's kind of like a Veiler. In my eyes, this is like a Veiler or an imperm, but just like a little bit better, right? It's not like targeting a monster on the field, so it doesn't give them options to dodge. And my guess is because of these restrictions, this card will not be able to be widely played. So you're also not worried about something like crossout designator cutting you off from this card resolving. So those are some of the benefits there. I will say though, because this restriction is like kind of brutal, it seems like this card maybe could have negated and destroyed, and maybe that would have been okay. But it's alright. And then the other effect that's really the icing on the cake for this card as well. So after you negate the monster effect on field, if you have any trap card engraved, you get to add a Dominus card from your deck to your hand. I don't think there's any other previous cards other than Impulse and Purge. But being able to get either for free on top of that is really nice, especially since the restriction is only stopping monster effects. Keep in mind, we talked about how this restriction stops you from using hand traps and stuff like that. Monster hand traps, basically, the same turn you use it, right? Because you're not using a monster hand trap before you use it. You're not going to be able to use monster hand traps after. And also keep in mind, this goes until the end of the next turn, which means you also have to be playing a deck that does not mind being locked out of monster effects in hand, grave, or banish. So, I'm not gonna lie, this kind of sounds like a stun card. Like, actually, like you can only play it in decks like, no, even Flu doesn't work, because Flu still needs to trigger its effects in banish. Normally, this is the kind of card that like would work with Flu, but because this includes banished monsters effects, you also can't do that. But you'd have to look for effects that are only on field, which is tough. That is real tough. That means you might be looking at maybe even Kashtira makes more sense, right? Because I believe they have the inherent summons where they're not activating in hand to summon, so that's bypassing it. Almost all their monster effects are on field. So maybe Kashtira is a deck you would look at a card like this in. But man, it is really interesting. This card does have quite some brutal restrictions. I will say this, as far as me personally, the one deck that is shooting to the front of my mind is a deck that I've showcased on the channel before, and it is, and it's Primite. I think that's super, super interesting because the Primite, I guess Primite, Phantasm Spiral is the one that jumps to the absolute front of my mind because that deck can play both Dominus cards, which is maybe the only deck in the entire game that really wants to, unless you're just playing something unplayably bad. Just decks need monsters. Decks need different attributes of monsters to play. That deck doesn't need either because you're only really summoning tokens and vanillas. That deck can play Impulse. That deck can play Purge. That deck can play Imperm. And now that deck can play this card with really no restriction. You don't activate monster effects in the hand, grave, or banishment really ever. I guess when Aether Barrel Dragon comes out, which is he'll be out, in a week, so he will be there. But though I will say about this, as far as how that card pairs with this card, you normal summon that card, it gets you a Primite card, then you use its effect to attribute itself to clear itself off the field that deck, and then engrave during either player's standby phase. If you just have a vanilla on field or engrave, it adds itself back to your hand. So that card doesn't even have to trigger on your opponent's standby. You can just not trigger it because it'll be restricted by palms because it'll be engrave. You can't activate it. And then it'll just come back on your next standby. So you still get it for your next turn for follow-up. That card's been a really nice addition to the deck, and could be really nice with this card. Not to mention, that's just a really insane lineup because you'd actually be able to play potentially 12 of the trap hand traps, which means pairing this with either of those just means you have 3 hand traps, basically. So if you're able to, like, imperm your opponent, then Palms of the Kings your opponent, you'll already have a trap engrave. So now Palms is adding you another one of the Dominus cards. That's really, really interesting. So I don't know. This card is certainly interesting. This is not a nothing card. Its restrictions will probably keep it from seeing play in a vast majority of decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! But it is a decent hand trap. You know what? I think I like that they didn't even make this card like a crazy, like, auto win card. You know what I mean? With how crazy these restrictions are, they might have wanted to go in and be like, let's make this one of the strongest hand traps in the game. What it does is honestly not that crazy, right? It's kind of giving you the same outcome as Imperm and Veiler, but it has some bonuses. So it does have some reasons to play it if your deck can facilitate it. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But when Konami makes cards like these, it usually means they're going to, and you don't have anything in the forefront of your mind on what's going to work with it. A lot of times, very soon after, we'll get something that, a new archetype that you're going to be like, oh, this archetype plays Palms of the Kings for sure. But we'll see. We'll keep an eye out for it. Maybe it's from Justice Hunters. Maybe it's a new archetype from the next core set following this one. I have no idea, but we'll have to keep an eye out for it. So, there you go, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, let me know your thoughts down below on this new hand trap. Where do you land on it? Do you think it's like decent, but there's so few decks are going to be able to play it with the restrictions? That's kind of where I land, but it is still a card that's going to be worth eyeing up, especially depending on your strategy. But let me know your thoughts down below. I'm out of here for today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.